the kind of mismatch between our biology and the food environment, what is it that makes these drugs particularly effective?
Well, I think what's fascinating for me and what makes them so effective is the quietening of the food noise. And food noise is not actually a scientifically determined term yet. I think it will be soon, but it's different for everybody. So different people have different forms of food noise. But what this seems to be particularly effective for is reducing the desire to consume foods that are marketed to us, basically. So food environment as it stands in places like the US, the UK, Australia, is an obesogenic food environment, which basically means it's a food environment which biologically is promoting obesity. And that's quite a strong statement, but it's true. So like, it's not just me that thinks this or says this. And what these drugs do is they essentially make the advertising and the marketing and the hyperpalatability of these foods less attractive. So you biologically, physically don't actually want it anymore. And we see this across hyperpalatable fatty foods and very sweet foods, but we also see it across alcohol and tobacco. So I guess one thing that is exciting is that the public health impact of this drug is actually a bit broader than just helping people to improve their food consumption and metabolic health in that way. Quite a large number of people see that they just don't really want to drink as much. In the book, I give an example of one of my patients, and of all the stories, of course, have changed. But I've had a few patients who actually drank more than they should have for their health, and they were aware of that. But it was really the GLP-1 medications that made them stop drinking so much.
Wow.
Because they just didn't want to drink. So there's this combined effect of resisting what we're being marketed and advertised all the time. Because the moment our food environment is pushing us to purchase. So like it's a very pro-consumption food environment. There's, coffee stores at every corner. There's adverts on television, on Instagram, on TikTok, any social media platform, radio, out of home advertising. And the cheapest, most accessible, most convenient foods tend to be hyperpalatable, nutrient-lacking foods that don't do anything to support our health. And these drugs make you kind of not want to eat them. So that's huge because you suddenly have... So I remember one of the very first people I spoke to who had started taking these drugs specifically for weight loss and obesity. She said to me, for the first time in her adult life, she had time to think about something other than food. And to me, I was like, wow, she's like, I now have time to think about other things. Food is not my primary driver and my primary thought all day. So it opens this window. I love to talk about windows of opportunity, Simon. There's lots of different windows of opportunity across the life course. These drugs offer a window of opportunity for people to actually choose, be mindful about what they're going to eat next, with the noise of like the advertising and marketing turned right down. So you become much more empowered to make the food choices you want to make. It's a pretty big deal. I think that's where it's giving the power back to the people that are taking these drugs. And listen, you don't have to take a GLP-1, by the way, to help reduce food noise, of course, but for people who have really struggled with this a lot of their lives, it's a massive switch.
What I'm hearing is that it's not necessarily an even playing field when it comes to someone's desire to eat certain foods. Because I think there is an assumption out there, and I've seen people kind of make this claim or have this position, well, I lost an enormous amount of weight changing my diet without a GLP-1. Therefore, I'm evidence that discipline and willpower is enough. But what I'm hearing from you is that that's a difficult thing to say, given that there are differences between individuals in terms of the food noise and what that experience is like.
Absolutely. So I mentioned that we all have the same number of cells, the L cells, that have the potential to create these peptides. But the end of that line is our brain. And our hypothalamus is the region of the brain that is most responsible for food reward, food-seeking behavior. And the hypothalamus, those regions of the brain, is where you see the differences in genetics, is where you see intergenerational changes. So, for example, if a woman is living with obesity and becomes pregnant, if she has leptin resistance during the pregnancy, it changes the actual wiring of the hypothalamus in that baby, who will then go on to have a much higher food-seeking, food reward system than a baby who wasn't born to a mother living with obesity. Now, this is not always the case. I'm just giving you an example. Like, it's not fair to compare people and say, well, everyone has the same setup. We don't. So genetics plays a huge part and a huge role in how our brain is set up and wired to respond to that food noise and to respond to those cues. So whilst we, as I said, we all have this really great potential in our gut, we don't all have the same wiring in our brains to respond to the same signals. And so it would be wrong to assume that because one person is able to lose, I've had great success stories of people losing weight without medication, right? But it's not for everyone. And that's why, if it was just a case of willpower, then we wouldn't be in this situation. Truly, like, if people it's not like we've had a mass collapse in willpower over the past 2 generations. That's not what's happened.
Right. If you were to send our ancestors from 500 years ago into now, the present time, they would have been just as vulnerable to this environment.
Yeah, well, arguably, some of the epigenetic changes means that our children are more vulnerable than our ancestors 500 years ago. So including some of the things I just mentioned, like we have a lot of babies are born to mothers who have metabolic dysfunction now, and that does put them at a disadvantage. And it's not a genetic change yet. Of course, you don't change genes in one generation. It's mostly epigenetics. So even 500 years ago, they may have stood a slightly better chance, but it's worsened generation by generation since it's sort of the 50s, which is sad, right? And so it means we also need to help people to undo some of this effect that the food environment has had on our health.
If you've been listening to me or some of my guests talk about the gut microbiome, you'll know that it thrives on very specific types of fiber and polyphenols and resistant starch, many of which the average person falls short on, despite the very best of intentions. That's why Dr. Will Bolsowitz and I founded 38 Terra, a gut health company where science meets supplementation. An independently conducted 15-day MSHIME study found that our first product, Daily Microbiome Nutrition, or DMN for short, significantly increased short-chain fatty acid production and encouraged the growth of beneficial microbes linked to better gut and metabolic health. It's a simple daily scoop that you can add to water or your smoothie. No sugar, no fillers, just clinically backed ingredients that make your gut bugs happy. So if you want to support your microbiome in a meaningful, science-backed way, check out 38terra.com and use the code THEPROOF to save 20% off your first order.